Alright guys, in today's video we're going over some very interesting comments that were made by PlayStation CEO Jim Ryan recently, some very revealing comments as well, where he talks about Sony's overall approach to game development, what we can expect from their internal teams. He actually lets us know that he does in fact play video games, which I think is kind of funny, but he also talks about Horizon Forbidden West and the next God of War, specifically letting us know when we can expect the next God of War to release. So some very interesting stuff here, as I said, that I know you guys will want to know about. So before we dive into it, do me a favor, hit the like button to help the video out and show it your support. And if you are new here to the channel, please hit that subscribe button as well. But this is reading from PlayStation Lifestyle, and the title reads, Sony's Jim Ryan says it's better to wait for a great game because players only remember the best games. So a very loaded statement coming from Jim Ryan. I don't know if it's worded as well as it could be, because some people are going to read this and not feel so great about it, but I'll let you know my thoughts on it in a moment here. Sony Interactive Entertainment CEO Jim Ryan has said that it's better to wait for studios to make a great game rather than rush development because players only remember the best games. In an interview with China's TMT Post, which was translated by the actual publication itself, so some of these translations might be a little shaky, Jim Ryan said that great games perform better than those that are just okay because players remember the good games for a long time and want sequels. He believes that games that are just okay eventually are forgotten about. Now, just to talk about this quote for a moment here, because this is the one that a lot of people are hung up on right now. A lot of people see it as a negative, which I can understand. Again, I'm not sure how accurate the translation itself is, but I think that there is a lot of truth to what Jim Ryan's saying here, and a lot of people just kind of don't want to accept it. But I think the reason why people take offense to it is because obviously there are plenty of gamers who remember the okay games and still look back fondly on just the okay games, right? Not every single game that's remembered has to be the top tier, best of the best. But I think what he's generally trying to get across is that, you know, the games that Sony strives to make are the ones that really do kind of go on to be remembered for years and decades even, and the ones that just always kind of stand out in people's, you know, memories fondly. And you know, you can argue that there are these okay games or these somewhat mediocre games that are still kind of remembered, but, you know, I do think there is truth to what he's saying here. It does come off as a bit arrogant, but I think the general idea that he's trying to get across isn't actually incorrect, right? I think it's safe to say that an okay game or a game that's just mediocre definitely fades from your memory much quicker than one of the best games you've ever experienced, right? But he goes on to say, of course, due to financial and product portfolio considerations, we will also give pressure to studios to deliver a certain product within the expected time. But in general, we don't want products that are okay. We want the best. And so we do have to acknowledge here that something else Jim Ryan's saying is that they're talking about the time that they're willing to give their teams to achieve this, which I think is very important to acknowledge as well, because it's one of these things where it's like, look, if you're going to sit here and say that you want the best of the best, you got to give your teams the time necessary to create the best of the best. And I think that's certainly an important point to acknowledge, because the two go hand in hand. And it's just nice to know that Sony is aware of this. I mean, we saw how many times a game like The Last of Us Part 2 was delayed, and it was clear that Naughty Dog kept going to Sony and saying, look, we need more time. And Sony had no problem giving them that time. And then you see why. It's because, you know, I know not everybody liked the story of The Last of Us Part 2, but putting that aside, I mean, nobody can argue that the game wasn't top tier quality, right? In almost every regard. So that's the kind of stuff that requires a lot of time. But he does make it clear that they are still putting some pressure on their studios. And I think that's important too. You can't just tell your teams, hey, take as long as you want, because at that point, honestly, you know, with the way creative people work, you know, it'll never come out. It's like there can always be improvements, obviously, but there has to be that management, you know, that comes in and gives them just the right amount of time and also the right amount of pressure, right? It's kind of two things that have to work in harmony. But it goes on to say, Ryan's definition of a great game is one that arouses players' emotions. He says, I think the best gaming experiences should allow players to enter an immersive experience in the game, allowing players to fully integrate into the game and experience different emotions. In the same interview, Jim Ryan said that Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is the best game he's played in the past year. He usually prefers games with a slower pace, but was surprised by how much joy he got out of playing Rift Apart. As for what's next, Jim Ryan said that both Horizon Forbidden West and God of War are the most anticipated upcoming titles from its first-party studios. When it comes to third-party studios, he revealed that FIFA and Call of Duty continue to be extremely popular among PlayStation players. It's worth noting that in the same interview, he did explicitly say that the next God of War, or the God of War sequel, is coming in, quote, a year or so, unquote. So, you know, what this tells me about God of War specifically is that if this is true, which I think it's safe to say it is, if it wasn't, I don't think Jim Ryan would have given a time frame. We are going to be getting it within the first half of 2022, which is not all that surprising. You know, March or April, I think, would be a good time frame for the next God of War release. But what this also tells me is that we're going to have to see and hear more about it soon, right? This is a game that's going to need a pretty good amount of time to kind of like, you know, get all the marketing out there and build up the hype in the way that we know Sony can obviously do it with a game like God of War. So I do suspect we're going to hear and see more about God of War relatively soon. I think that Jim Ryan saying that it's going to release within the next year or so is a good indicator that we can expect to get some more updates on it in the not too distant future, certainly before the end of this year, right? I think that's the general expectation. And obviously, we are all looking very much forward to Horizon Forbidden West, and we're all just waiting to find out if it's going to get delayed into 2022 or not. I think most of us want this game to launch this year, but again, Jim Ryan's making it clear that they're not going to compromise on quality. They're not going to do it. They know that Horizon Forbidden West is going to be one of the biggest games that launches this entire generation, maybe ever, and they're going to give Guerrilla Games as much time as they need. They're going to push them to try their best to have it done by the end of the year, but if they say, look, we need 3-4 more months, they're going to give it to them, and I think that's totally fine. But something else that Jim Ryan talked about that I want to focus on, I think it's something that we constantly see talked about, right? We've seen it talked about all this year, and my problem with it is how it's consistently, at least online anyway, I feel like you don't see this in actual, tangible, real-world data results, right? But online anyway, it's always kind of looked at as a negative thing. The fact that Sony just wants to continue to focus purely on AAA game development. So we have Jim Ryan making it clear in this interview that they want the best games. They're not going to be satisfied with just okay games or games that are considered mediocre. They want the best games that they can possibly get, and they're going to continue to push their studios to strive for that. And so in the same interview, Jim Ryan talks about how their internal PlayStation teams are not focusing at all on smaller titles. They're only focused on AAA game development, and that doesn't mean they're not going to have any smaller titles coming to the PlayStation ecosystem. Jim Ryan makes it clear that that's going to be, you know, kind of delegated to their partners, right, and indie developers that they're working with. So I want to read a little bit of this as well. This is reading from Gaming Bolt. And the title says, internal PlayStation studios will focus on AAA development, while smaller games will come from partner indie devs. Goes on to say it was reported earlier in the year that Sony had internally shifted focus to start prioritizing development of AAA blockbusters, no longer wanting to develop smaller games. And though that was met with plenty of backlash, it's easy to see why they would make such a decision. It's not hard to understand why they want to chase the sort of success enjoyed by games like God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, and Spider-Man, to name a few. But what does this mean about smaller, more experimental releases? PlayStation CEO Jim Ryan was asked the question in a recent interview with TMT Post. His answer, Sony is going to do both, but it's also going to clearly separate the two. Ryan says that while first-party PlayStation studios are going to keep focusing on making big-budget AAA games, Sony will also keep partnering with smaller independent studios to ensure that PlayStation maintains a healthy stream of more small-scale experiences. Our internal studios typically make larger games, but we will also cooperate with partner studios to develop some smaller scale games, Ryan said. We work closely with independent game studios and will provide them with some support in terms of development, funding, and marketing. These independent teams are usually very small, about 10 to 20 people. Through supporting these studios, we are also incubating game products and establishing relationships with these studios. Perhaps they will be the next generation of AAA game developers. Well, maybe in 5 or 10 years, our relationship with these independent game studios will be different. PlayStation's partnership with indie developers has led to some notable titles, including the likes of The Pathless and the upcoming Bridge of Spirits, which is always encouraging to see. And so this to me was interesting, but not surprising. But people will act surprised by this, right? I don't know how they can at this point. I'm not saying everybody has to be on board with Sony's direction, but like if you were to ask me personally what I think about Sony's direction and what Jim Ryan's saying, I'm 100% in agreement with it. Like, I think this is what PlayStation should be doing, right? I know that there are a lot of PlayStation fans who have, come to expect some smaller scale, more experimental titles from them, from their internal teams, right? And they're feeling upset that they're not really going to get that. They're only going to get that from their partners. I understand that, but in my opinion, Sony is just doubling down or even tripling down on what they do best, and that is they are the best in the industry, in my opinion, at creating AAA game experiences. And you look at some of their teams, right? Sony Santa Monica, Guerrilla Games, Naughty Dog. You look at these teams and you think to yourself, Insomniac Games, I don't want to forget them. I mean, there's plenty. You look at these teams and you realize that they make some of the biggest and best games in the industry, period, right? And Sony wants to push them to not only continue to do that, but to try to raise the bar even higher. Sony has made it clear they want PlayStation to be the place where you go to get the biggest and best gaming experiences. And so I have absolutely no problem with them making it so that every one of their internal teams is going to be either a AAA developer, like a top tier AAA developer, or if they're not that yet, they're going to be molded into one. I've been saying this for some time. It's been made clear, in my opinion, not only through what Jim Ryan has been saying and the games that Sony has been releasing, but even through multiple job listings for studios we haven't heard from in some time. It's been made clear that every single studio underneath the PlayStation Studios banner, like their first parties, the studios that Sony owns entirely, they're all going to be working on AAA games. But I also love the fact that Sony is trying to find a healthy combination of both. They're saying, look, we're going to leave the smaller, more experimental titles to our partner indie devs. And I think that that's a perfect, combination. I think that they can work great together that way. I do acknowledge some of the indies that Sony is showing me through the state of plays or through just some of the indies that they show in their events, right? And I think that a lot of these indies have potential, and it seems that that's what Sony kind of looks for. They look for these indie titles that seem like they have the most potential. But I just think that this is the right way for Sony to be going about it because, I know, again, that not everybody's going to be on board. And, some people look at this as like, well, if Sony wants every title to be a blockbuster, that sounds kind of boring. I don't think it is at all, right? The reason why I say this is people are like, well, what does this mean? Does this mean that Sony's not going to greenlight sequels to games or games that don't do well right out of the gate but have potential? Like, let's look at Days Gone. Why aren't we getting a Days Gone 2? Listen, I know it's easy to assume that because we're not getting a Days Gone 2 that's bad news and that means that Sony suddenly doesn't care about these games that, aren't lighting the world on fire out of the gate. But what you also need to understand is that what did they decide to do instead? They go to Sony Bend and they say, you know what? Make a new AAA IP. That is like 10 times, probably 100 times more risky than them just greenlighting a Days Gone 2. And that's what I think people fail to understand. It's not that Sony is risk averse. It's just that if they feel that there's more that can be done, they're going to enable their studios. They're going to give their studios a chance to do that. So right now, Sony Bend is working on a brand new AAA IP that they sound very excited about. It's not Days Gone 2, and I think that it's going to be okay. I actually think that maybe this is better. I know that may sound crazy, and I love Days Gone, but I'm very excited to see, okay, they have a clean slate now. They can do anything, literally anything with the AAA budget. Let's see what they do, right? They're going to take everything they learned from Days Gone and apply it to this new title. So I don't think people are necessarily justified in being worried that Sony's not going to take risks anymore. If anything, it seems like they're going to continue to take even more risks, but I think the general theme of everything we're talking about right now is clear. Sony wants the biggest and best games. They want PlayStation to be the place where you go to get the biggest and best games in the industry, period. That's what they want. They want you to come to PlayStation for that. That doesn't mean you can't get smaller games. Like, I've heard a lot of people complaining lately how it's like, oh, PlayStation doesn't have any games and, you know, this and that. And it's like, I don't know what they're talking about. Like, I go and I visit the PlayStation store and there's more games than I know what to do with. Indie games, like the smallest of small indie games, medium-sized games, AAA games, right? But when it comes to what Sony's going to be doing themselves, they want the biggest and the best. They want AAA. And I'm sorry, but that's what they do best. And that's what I love about Sony. That is what drew me into Sony for the longest time, right? And that's, you know, I'd much rather see them doing this than just kind of like being like, yeah, we don't really care to make, you know, gaming, our experiences like Ghost of Tsushima or Horizon Zero Dawn. You know, we don't really care to make them as big anymore. We're just going to kind of scale that down. Like, to me, that would be terrible, right? Like, I don't want to see that. Right? The idea that some of Sony studios like Pixel Opus and even Housemarque, you know, right? That they're going to be grown to do even more and go even further with their AAA, you know, with their game development to try to become AAA teams. That's exciting to me. I feel like that's what every team wants. They want to grow. They want to get bigger. They want to be more ambitious. And I think that there's nothing wrong at all with Sony deciding that that's what they're going to enable all of their teams to do. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you did enjoy it. I hope you did find it informative. I just thought that some of the stuff here that Jim Ryan was saying was very interesting and very telling. And I know that you guys like to be up to date with some of the things that Jim Ryan has to say. And that first, you know, comment we went over that he made, I don't think it was worded as well as it could have been. But I think if you know, kind of read between the lines and try to understand the general idea that he's trying to get across, it's really not hard to miss. So let me know down in the comments below what you think about everything we discussed here today. Leave the video a like, subscribe if you're new, hit the bell notification icon, and feel free to share the video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.